If I stop drinking caffeine at say 6 p.m. and I crash, then I crash into a slumber, a deep night of sleep.
Yeah.
Is that sleep really as deep as I think it is? Because given the half-life of caffeine that you mentioned a few moments ago, I have to imagine that having some of that caffeine circulating in my system might disrupt the depth of sleep or somehow the architecture of sleep in a way that even if I get 8 or who knows, even 10 hours of sleep, it might not be as restorative as I would like it to be.
Yeah. And that is the danger, just sort of that, those people that you described who say, and a lot of them will speak with me too, say, look, I can have 2 espressos with dinner and I fall asleep fine and I stay asleep. Because usually those are the 2 phenotypes that we typically see with too much caffeine. Mm-hmm. I just can't fall asleep as easily as I want to, or I fall asleep, but I just can't stay asleep. And caffeine can do both of those things quite potently.
How late in the day do you think is, assuming somebody, translate this folks, if you go to bed earlier or later, you have to shift the hours accordingly, but given somebody who typically gets into bed around 10:30 and falls asleep around 11:30, when would you recommend they halt caffeine intake? And these are not strict prescriptives, but I think people do benefit from having some fairly clear guidelines of what might work for them. Would you say cut off caffeine by what time of the day?
I would usually say take your typical bedtime and count back sort of somewhere between 10 to 8 hours is probably getting a little bit close, but take back sort of 10 hours or 8 hours of time. That's the time when you should really stop, using caffeine is the suggestion. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because for those people who even just keep drinking up until, into the evening, you're right that they can fall asleep fine. Maybe they stay asleep, but the depth of their deep sleep is not as deep anymore. And so there are 2 consequences. The first is that for me, and it can be up to by 30%. And for me to drop your deep sleep by 30%, I'd have to age you by between 10 to 12 years. Or you can just do it every night to yourself with a couple of espressos. The second is that you then wake up the next morning and you think, well, I didn't have problems falling asleep and I didn't have problems staying asleep, but I don't feel particularly restored by my sleep. So now I'm reaching for 3 or 4 cups of coffee the next morning rather than just 2 or 3 cups of coffee. And so goes this dependency cycle that you then need your uppers to wake you up in the morning. And then sometimes people will use alcohol in the evening to bring them down because they're overly caffeinated. And alcohol, and we can speak about that too, also has very deleterious impacts on your sleep as well.